The wind on the prairie moved softly across the tall elk ranch. But inside the small wooden house, life no longer felt calm. Chief Raymond Tall Elk, once a strong and active tribal leader, now lived in a wheelchair after a sudden ranch accident that changed everything for him and his two daughters. Before the accident, he was known as a man who helped everyone. He fixed broken roofs, guided young men who felt lost, and always welcomed travelers with warm tea and honest conversation. People often said, "If you're in trouble, go to Raymond." But when he became the one who needed help, the kindness he gave out for years did not return to him. Ayanna, the elder daughter, had always been responsible. She took after her father, steady, brave, and patient. Mesha, the younger one, was softer and shy, more comfortable with books and painting than with running a ranch. When the accident happened, both sisters stepped forward without hesitation. They believed the community would help. After all, their father had been their leader, their guide, their voice in hard times. At first, many people came. They brought warm meals, helped feed the horses, and promised they would be there every step of the way. The girls felt grateful, even hopeful. But as the days passed, those visits became less frequent. The meals stopped. The support faded. People said they were busy, that they would return next week. But next week never came. Slowly, the sisters realized they were on their own. Ayanna tried to stay strong. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise to check the barns and water the cattle. She had learned everything from her father, but doing it alone was different. Her hands hurt, her back ached, and some days she felt like crying before her chores even began. Misha did everything she could inside the house, cooking, cleaning, managing their father's medicines, but she worried constantly. She watched her sister work long hours and feared she might break down under the pressure. Their once busy ranch became quiet. Overgrown grass reached the fences. A few wooden boards on the barn roof loosened and tapped of the wind. The cattle grew thinner because the feed was running low. Bills stacked up on the kitchen table, papers covering a wooden surface that once held family meals and happy laughter. In town, things were no better. Whenever Ayanna and Mesha pushed their father's wheelchair along the dusty road, they noticed how people avoided their eyes. Some neighbors who once sat with the chief around a fire now walked past them with tight smiles or quick, polite nods. A few even whispered. Ayanna could feel their gaze. Not cruel but distant, as if the family's hardship made others uncomfortable. She held her head high, but inside she felt abandoned. One afternoon, while Ayanna tried to barter for a small bag of cattle feed, a quiet cowboy standing near the back of the store noticed the tension. The shopkeeper gave her a price much higher than usual, and though she tried to reason politely, he remained firm. "We don't have many buyers these days," the shopkeeper said with a shrug. Ayanna knew it was not true. She wanted to speak up, but didn't want to cause trouble. Instead, she lowered her eyes and handed over their last few dollars. When she turned away, the quiet cowboy watched her leave, carrying the heavy bag alone while Misha struggled behind her, pushing their father's wheelchair through the uneven dirt. The cowboy didn't speak. He didn't judge. He simply watched with thoughtful eyes. His name was Luke Harper. Most people in town didn't know much about him. He had arrived just a few weeks earlier, riding an old brown horse and carrying only a bedroll and a small bag of tools. He was a man of few words, the kind who spent more time listening than talking. He came to the prairie, looking for quiet work and a simple life. But on that afternoon, when he saw the Tall Elk family struggling, something inside him softened. He didn't step forward, yet he wasn't the kind of man to interfere without understanding the full story. Instead, he followed them with his eyes, noticing how tired Ayanna looked and how gently Misha steadied their father's wheelchair. Later that same day, the sisters returned to the ranch with the feed. The sun was sinking, painting the sky in orange and gold. As they reached the gate, Ayana's arms trembled from carrying the heavy bag. Mesha hurried to help, but her hands slipped, and the bag fell, spilling feed onto the ground. Misha's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Aya." "It's okay," Ayana said softly, though her voice was shaky with exhaustion. She knelt on the ground, trying to gather the feed back into the torn sack. Her hands trembled, and she could feel the tightness in her chest rising. Her father watched from the wheelchair, his eyes full of worry and helplessness. He hated seeing his daughters struggle because he couldn't move, couldn't lift, couldn't protect them the way he once did. Behind them, the sound of a horse approached slowly. Ayana looked up, startled, her fingers still clutching the spilled grains. She saw boots first, then a horse, and finally, the quiet cowboy from town. Luke dismounted gently and crouched beside her without saying a word. He began gathering the feed with calm, steady motions. Mesha watched him with wide eyes, unsure what to think. The chief studied him too, curious but cautious. After a while, Luke finally spoke, his voice low and respectful. "Hard day?" he asked. Ayana didn't know why, but something in his tone felt kind, not pitying. She nodded slightly. "We're fine," she answered. "We can manage." Luke nodded, as if he understood both the words she spoke and the ones she did not say. Then he stood, tied the feed bag securely with a piece of rope from his saddle, and lifted it with ease. "Fence on your north side is leaning," he said quietly. "If you like, I can fix it tomorrow." Ayana blinked. No one had offered real help in months. People said they cared, but no one actually came. "You don't have to," she said carefully, unsure of his intention. "I know," Luke replied, "but I'll come anyway." And that was all he said before tipping his hat, mounting his horse, and riding away. That night, after dinner, the sisters sat at the kitchen table while their father rested nearby. A small lamp lit the room, casting warm light on their tired faces. Mesha whispered, "Do you think he means it? About helping with the fence?" Ayana stared at the window, where the prairie moon glowed faintly. "I don't know," she said softly, but he didn't sound like he was making a promise. He sounded like he'd already decided. The chief watched his daughters and finally spoke with calm certainty. "Some people speak with actions," he said. "And that man looks like someone who keeps his word." Early the next morning, the quiet cowboy returned. True to his promise, he brought tools and extra wooden posts. He didn't wait to be welcomed. He simply nodded to Ayana, then walked toward the north fence and began working with calm focus. From the porch, Mesha whispered, "He really came." Ayana nodded, still surprised but grateful. For the first time in many months, she felt a small spark of hope push through the heaviness around her heart. While Luke worked, he didn't talk much. He hammered new posts into the ground, fixed loose wires, and removed brush that had tangled around the fence. Every step he took was steady and thoughtful, as though he understood the land without needing to ask questions. The chief watched from the porch, his eyes thoughtful. He had always believed that true character showed in stillness, not noise, and something about Luke's quiet dedication reminded him of the old ways when people helped because it was right, not because they expected something in return. By midday, the fence stood straight and strong again. Luke wiped sweat from his brow, though he didn't complain or ask for anything. Before leaving, he simply said, "I'll come back tomorrow. There's still work to do." Ayana wanted to argue, to insist he wasn't required to help. But before she could speak, he mounted his horse and rode off again. That evening, the ranch felt different, lighter, as if hope had finally opened one window in a house full of closed doors. The chief smiled gently at his daughters. "Sometimes," he said, "life sends help in quiet ways." Neither girl knew it yet, but Luke Harper's first simple act of kindness was only the beginning of the change their small ranch and their hearts were about to experience. The next morning came quietly. With soft pink light rising over the prairie, Ayanna stepped outside with a cup of warm tea in hand, expecting another long day of chores. Instead, she stopped in her tracks. Luke was already there. He was fixing the loose boards on the barn roof, steady and focused, as though he had lived on the ranch his whole life. Ayanna blinked in surprise. "He's even earlier today," she whispered to herself. Misha peeked out from behind her sister, rubbing sleep from her eyes. When she saw Luke, she smiled shyly. "He works like the sun," she whispered. Quiet, but always there. Inside the house, the chief had heard the small commotion. He turned his wheelchair toward the window, watching the cowboy's patient movements. A soft smile touched his face. "A man who comes before dawn," he murmured, "is a man you can trust." Luke didn't look up when the sisters approached. He simply tipped his hat in greeting and continued working. He replaced broken boards, tightened loose nails, and cleared branches that had fallen during the last storm. The barn looked stronger with each hour. The girls tried offering help, but he always said the same thing. "You have your own work. I'll take care of this." And he meant it. He repaired the barn door next, smoothing the wood with quiet care. Then he walked along the overgrown path and trimmed bushes, clearing space around the ranch so the wind could move freely again. Every task he finished brought back a piece of life and pride that the family thought they had lost. By lunchtime, the ranch looked brighter. Even the air felt different. Ayanna made sandwiches and brought them outside. Luke accepted his quietly, nodding a simple thank you. They sat on the porch steps not too close, but close enough to share the peaceful moment. The prairie stretched out before them in a wide golden view. "You don't have to do all this," Ayanna finally said. "Our ranch isn't simple work." Luke took a thoughtful bite before answering. "Some places need more than simple work," he replied. "They need steady hands." Then he added in his calm voice, "And I've got steady hands. 2, 2, 2, 1, 2. Misha smiled at the gentle truth in his words. Ayanna looked down, touched by his kindness, though she didn't fully know how to express it. After lunch, Luke helped the sisters carry water buckets, organized the shed, and even repaired the old wheelchair ramp so the chief could move outside more easily. The chief tested the ramp later, rolling over the smooth boards with surprising ease. "Feels like new," the chief said warmly. Luke simply nodded, his face calm but pleased. In the days that followed, Luke returned every morning. He fixed fences, mended saddles, and helped care for the cattle. He always worked with quiet heart, never asking for payment, praise, or attention. What he offered was not charity, it was genuine care. Slowly, the land responded. The cattle moved with more energy. The barns looked brighter. Even the wildflowers near the fence began to bloom again. And in the middle of all that quiet change, the sisters felt lighter too. They laughed more often. They rested better. For the first time in a long while, they felt they were not carrying the world alone. The townspeople noticed the change as well. When Ayanna went to buy supplies, the shopkeeper paused, watching her with surprise. "Your ranch seems busy again," he said. "Looks like someone has been helping." Ayanna nodded politely but didn't say much. She wasn't the type to boast. But when she left the store, she heard whispers behind her. Curious whispers. Respectful ones. They wondered who was helping the tall elk family when everyone else had turned away. And though they didn't know Luke's name yet, they felt his presence through the work he left behind. One bright afternoon, Ayanna invited Luke to join them for dinner. He hesitated at first, but finally nodded. That evening, the four of them sat around a warm meal. Laughter filled the house as the sisters told childhood stories, and even Luke, who rarely spoke, shared a few light-hearted moments from towns he had passed through. The chief watched them with peaceful eyes. His daughters looked happy again, not just tired survivors of hardship. And the cowboy who sat quietly at their table did not look like a visitor. He looked like someone who belonged. After dinner, as Luke helped clear the dishes, the chief motioned for him to come closer. Luke rolled the wheelchair forward until they were at eye level. "You remind me of the men from the old days," the chief said gently. "Men who helped because their hearts told them to, not because someone asked." "I thank you, Luke Harper." Luke didn't know what to say at first. Compliments were not something he was used to receiving. He simply nodded, placing a hand over his chest as a gesture of respect. From that night on, Luke became part of the tall elk family's daily rhythm. He taught Misha how to guide the horses safely without fear. He showed Ayanna how to repair tools without hurting her hands. Sometimes he pushed the chief's wheelchair outside so the older man could feel the warm sun and breathe fresh prairie air. They talked about the sky, the land, and the memories of old traditions. The bond grew naturally, quietly, just like everything Luke did. But not everyone in town liked the feeling of guilt that Luke's actions stirred in them. Some people tried to act friendly again, stopping Ayanna in the street with sudden smiles. "We always meant to check on you," they said. "We've been praying for your father. We were just waiting for the right time to visit." Ayanna listened politely but said very little. The chief, wise and calm, knew the truth. People sometimes avoided what felt difficult. But now that the ranch was recovering, they wanted to be part of it again. One day, at a community gathering, the topic of the tall elk family came up. Some townsfolk tried to speak proudly, saying they had always cared. But Luke, who was standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, stepped forward for the first time. His voice was gentle, not angry, but firm with honesty. "A lot of people cared in words," he said. "But caring in words and caring in actions aren't the same." The crowd fell silent. Luke didn't say it to embarrass anyone. He said it because it was true, and because he respected the chief and his daughters. Ayanna and Misha stood nearby, stunned but grateful. Their father nodded slowly, moved by Luke's courage and sincerity. After that day, people began behaving differently, not out of guilt, but because Luke's honesty had reminded them what kindness was meant to look like. They offered small, genuine acts of help. A neighbor brought fresh vegetables. A teacher from the community center gave Mesha new paintbrushes. Someone even replaced the town wheelchair ramp so the chief could enter the community hall with ease. Slowly, the community's heart began to soften. As the weeks passed, Luke remained on the ranch, never speaking of leaving. The chief watched him with thoughtful eyes. Ayanna felt a warmth in her chest whenever she saw Luke working quietly in the fields. Mesha sensed the change too and often whispered, "He feels like family." One evening, the sky turned a beautiful shade of lavender. Ayanna and Luke stood by the fence, watching the horses graze peacefully. The wind carried the sweet scent of wild grass. "You've changed everything here," Ayanna said softly. Luke shook his head. "I didn't change everything," he replied gently. "I just gave the ranch the chance it deserved. I just way Luke Emble and gave us hope again," she whispered. Luke looked at her for a long moment, his eyes warm but humble. "Hope was already here," he said. "It just needed someone to help it breathe." Inside the house, the chief watched them through the window. He smiled. A deep, peaceful smile. His daughters were no longer alone. His home had life again. His heart felt lighter than it had in months. That night, he closed his eyes and whispered a quiet blessing to the wind, grateful for the quiet cowboy who had arrived like morning light, bringing warmth without asking for anything in return. The tall elk ranch stood stronger than ever. Not just because of mended fences or repaired barns, but because kindness had returned in the form of one steady, gentle man, Luke Harper, whose quiet actions reshaped their world with soft hands and an honest heart.